light from above, from the mountains to the prairies, through the ocean, white with foam. God bless America, my home, sweet home. God bless America, my home, sweet home.
This land is your land, this land is my land, from California to the New York Island, from the redwood forest to the Gulf Stream waters. This land was made for you and me. As I went walking that ribbon of highway, I saw above me that endless skyway. I saw below me that golden valley. This land was made for you and me. This land is your land, this land is my land, from California to the New York Islands, from the redwood forest to the Gulf Stream waters. This land was made for you and me. This land was made for you and me.
Good evening. Better a rabbi should lose his voice than a cantor. God Bless America, originally drafted in 1918 by Irving Berlin, then revised, revived, and when sung by Kate Smith, transformed into a national sensation in 1938 against a backdrop of fascism and anti-Semitism, is rightly considered our country's shadow national anthem. Berlin, born Israel Balin in Siberia, was the son of cantor Moses Balin. God Bless America, at once a simple and soaring song, is an homage to his father's sacred vocation and to the gratitude of an immigrant who found refuge in America, a prayer that both he and God might stand beside her and guide her through the night with a light from above. Not everyone, however, was enamored with Berlin's song. In February of 1940, in a beat-up boarding house at 43rd and 6th, just south of Bryant Park, the Dust Bowl troubadour Woody Guthrie sat down to write a rebuttal to Berlin, his protest ballad. The nation was still in the grip of the Great Depression. Unemployment, hunger, racial injustice, and class divide defined the landscape. Guthrie was angry. Far too many in breadlines and boxcars had been left out of Berlin's chorus. Guthrie's original verses were far sharper than the patriotic standard we all learned in grade school. One bright sunny morning in the shadow of the steeple, by the relief office, I saw my people. As they stood hungry, I stood there wondering if God blessed America for me. For Guthrie, for Pete Seeger, for Bruce Springsteen, and for so many since, This Land Is Your Land endures as an alternate national anthem. Democratic, inclusive, and unflinching, a counterbalance to Berlin's sentimental, aspirational, divinely blessed vision. Guthrie's ballad, a conscientious critique of America, blemishes and all. God Bless America and This Land Is Your Land, two distinct narratives canonized side by side in the American songbook. Narratives unite, narratives divide, and narratives evolve. Like Jews at the Passover Seder retelling the Exodus, from generation to generation, Americans are bound together and pulled apart by way of the stories we tell and what they say about ourselves. Consider the not yet digested Thanksgiving story. Is ours a tale of divine blessing and cooperation, the English separatists who fled persecution and survived their first harsh winter with the help of the natives? Or is it the story of arrival, followed by epidemic devastation, land theft, broken treaties, and settler expansion? Which tale is true? Are we Berlin's America or Guthrie's? Are we the America of Zangwill's melting pot or Horace Callan's symphonic pluralism? Unlike Jews, Americans hold no single historical account. There's no authorized American Haggadah to unite us. Each of us peers through the kaleidoscope of history to make sense of the past, to understand the present, and to chart a course for the future. Our conversations about our past, proxies for our most fervent hopes and deepest fears. The goal of tonight's program, in a sentence, is to model how to have that conversation responsibly, with integrity and humility. Tonight, as a community in dialogue with the chronicler-in-chief of American history, and even more importantly, in conversation at our own dinner tables in the days, weeks, and years to come. With our nation's semi-quincentennial but months away, our synagogue theme, appropriately, is America at 250. We began on the high holidays with the story of Revolutionary era Jew Jonas Phillips and the legacy of civic engagement and Jewish pride he bestowed upon us. We heard from Richard Haas in conversation with Julian Zelizer on the founding documents and our present-day civic obligations. Upcoming highlights include our annual Shabbaton, January 30th to 31st, when we will welcome Jonathan Sarna, the preeminent scholar of American Jewish history. In March, Jeffrey Rosen, CEO of the National Constitution Center. In April, a day trip to Philadelphia to visit the Museum of the American Revolution. And then in June, a Cantor's concert to celebrate the American Jewish musical traditions. Please register for these events. There will be others on the synagogue website. Two other announcements, because I'm a rabbi and I make announcements. This Thursday, December 4th, from 6 to 7, we'll stand in solidarity as proud New Yorkers, Jews and Zionists, at Lexington Avenue and 68th Street, never wavering in our support for Israel's right to exist as a Jewish homeland. And with Hanukkah around the corner, on Tuesday, December 16th at 7 p.m., the Cantors will lead us in a Night of Light Hanukkah concert right here in the sanctuary and online. In addition to our programmatic professionals, Rabbi Lori Kaufman, Mara Bernstein, and Julie Schwartz and the team, I want to express my deep appreciation to our lay leaders, Park Avenue Synagogue Officer Erica Friedman, Adult Education Chairs Don Bernstein and Jody Milner, and tonight's co-chairs Don Bernstein, Nancy Lasher, and Ben Happ. Most of all, on behalf of the entire community, I want to express profound gratitude to the Volk family, Diane, Annie, and Ben, for making this evening possible. Tonight inaugurates the annual Stephen R. Volk Lecture, an event that reflects so many of the ideals by which Stephen of blessed memory lived: love of country, love of community, intellectual inquiry and integrity, and the diligence to have actually finished all of Jon Meacham's books. Diane, may Stephen's memory be for a blessing, and I hope tonight's program honors his memory and fulfills your hopes. With the aspiration of making Park Avenue Synagogue the synagogue where national conversations are convened, cultivated, and lived, tonight marks a bold first step towards fulfilling that vision. Our topic is America at 250, and there's no one better than Jon Meacham to frame the subject. Next year's lecture will bring a different theme, and the year after that, still another, which is to say, as important as the what of tonight's conversation is the how of how the conversation happens, that in this era of vitriol and toxic divide, we at Park Avenue model a higher and more noble path, a calling, if you will, to the better angels of our nature, a place where we can both affirm faith and interrogate our own certainties, a community in which we can disagree without being disagreeable, a sanctuary that offers the comfort of home even as it invites the discomfort of engaging with alternative perspectives. In short, a synagogue united in purpose, but never insistent on uniformity of viewpoint. May we leave tonight not only wiser, but strengthened in our bonds of affection, and deeply proud of the example we're setting for ourselves and for others to follow. And now to introduce our guests this evening, please welcome Park Avenue Synagogue Officer Erica Friedman. Thank you.
Good evening. My name is Erica Friedman, and I'm an officer of the Park Avenue Synagogue Board of Trustees. In that role, I have the good fortune and privilege to work closely with our adult engagement team, who work hard to make events like tonight happen. Tonight, I have the great pleasure and honor of introducing our guest this evening, Jon Meacham, presidential historian, Pulitzer Prize-winning author, and one of America's most prominent public intellectuals. Meacham is the author of multiple New York Times bestsellers, including The Soul of America, The Battle for Our Better Angels, and His Truth is Marching On, John Lewis and the Power of Hope. He is also the author of several award-winning presidential biographies, including And There Was Light, Abraham Lincoln and the American Struggle, Thomas Jefferson, The Art of Power, and the Pulitzer Prize-winning American Lion, Andrew Jackson, in the White House. A highly sought-after commentator, Meacham regularly appears on MS Now, CNN, and other news outlets, and is a frequent guest on Morning Joe, Real Time with Bill Maher, and The 11th Hour. Meacham was also featured in the Ken Burns documentary series, The Roosevelts, An Intimate History. Named a global leader for tomorrow by the World Economic Forum, Meacham is a member of the Council on Foreign Relations and a fellow of the Society of American Historians. Meacham is also a distinguished visiting professor at Vanderbilt University, where he holds the Rogers Chair in the American Presidency. In 2024, Meacham was awarded the National Humanities Medal by President Biden and was honored as a Library Lion at the New York Public Library. Thank you, Mr. Meacham, for joining us tonight. We very much look forward to hearing from you.
And bar mitzvah you've ever been to. That was lovely, thank you. Do you do eulogies? Because I might need one. Haas won't be that nice. Y'all knew it already. Oh, sorry, Rabbi.
There's so many directions I could have taken that.
I just came here because I heard that this is where Richard Haas comes to Temple. And I was like, that can't be true. And Susan dragged him over, and that was great.
We're honored to have you. Welcome.
Thank you.
America at 250, a chance to look back, a chance to look forward. The topic has never been more important and more contentious. The debates about history, the 1619 Project, core claim being America's true founding was 1619, the year the first enslaved Africans were brought to the Virginia colony, followed by the 1776 Project. It seems that the student of the past is also always making a statement about the present and the future. So I ask you, with a softball, can history actually be objective?
No, it shouldn't be. I mean, any more can theology be objective? Sorry. No, I mean, now I have colleagues, Richard and I have colleagues, who think history is this very clinical thing, and that's true. I mean, there's a craft to it. There are canons of judging evidence. You have to be very careful about retrospectively applying the moral understandings of today to the past. The way to take moral account of the past is to see what other voices were in the room, so to speak. What else was being said in real time? It's very easy, as Arthur Schlesinger used to say, it's very easy to be self-righteous in retrospect. It's also cheap. If you look back and, my view is that you don't look back at the past condescendingly, nor should you look at it nostalgically, but look it in the eye so that perhaps we can judge ourselves more honestly when we look ourselves in the mirror. And to me, that's the moral utility of history. The moral utility of history is that it's a damn miracle, it's a miracle that we've gotten as much right as we have, right? Since the 3rd chapter of Genesis, we've been screwing things up. That's your business. I don't blame you, but you think about it. I mean, so to me, what's so remarkable about the United States of America is, it is a fundamentally human undertaking. It is not clinical. This is about our appetites and our ambitions. It's about our aspirations, our capacity to defer gratitude, to defer gratification, to manage and marshal all the complex feelings that make us people. And the remarkable thing about a democracy is that we're able, at our best, not to simply grab what we want whenever we want it. Right? This is give and take, and it's a lot easier to take than to give. A lot more human to take than to give. But that's why America demands a commitment to a kind of moral covenant. And this is not homiletic, but it is based on love thy neighbor. And let's be honest, if the author of Leviticus and Jesus, if everybody had been loving their neighbor, they wouldn't have thought to command it. Think that out. Think about it. I mean, you don't put up speed limits if everybody's driving safely. So clearly people weren't loving their neighbor enough because they thought to say, hey, by the way, do this. So if you'll indulge me, the neighbor, I know when you talk about neighbors in the secular context, Mr. Rogers comes to mind, right? And so just very quickly, I'll tell you a very quick story about a very small category called great tweets. It's like French military victories in the 20th century. It won't take very long. About a year and a half ago, someone tweeted out that if Doris Kearns Goodwin and Mr. Rogers had had a one-night stand, I would have resulted. I thought it was great, right? Doris, I will confide to you, was kind of pissed off. So she called me. She learned how to use her phone. And so she called, and I answered. I said, Mom. She said, that's not funny. She said, I wouldn't mind being your mother, but I don't want to be a floozy. And I said, it's okay. He picked you up in the C-SPAN bar. It's all right. It's okay. I'm sure there was a question there somewhere about it.
No, we're off to a great start. All right, so we mentioned Doris Kearns Goodwin, your mother.
My mother. Be respectful.
So you've written that history isn't necessarily comforting, but it should be inspirational. So who inspired you to become a historian?
Oh, that's a great question. I know this will surprise you that I was a strange child. I know that doesn't track at all. But I grew up on a Civil War battlefield, Missionary Ridge. It's what the Georgia-Tennessee border is about 110 miles to Atlanta. That's how Sherman got to Georgia, was through Missionary Ridge. And in the 1970s, I could still find Monet balls in our yard. That's how tactile history was. So to me, it was this drama that was not remote, but quite real. It was also, for what it's worth, in this era of, you mentioned 1619, of monuments and who should be commemorated. Many of the monuments in the South that date from any time before the 1920s or so are from the North because they won and they had money. And so they put up these monuments. It's the Illinois Reservation, the Sherman Reservation, these. So this is also the battle, by the way, where Arthur MacArthur, Douglas MacArthur's father, won the Medal of Honor at the age of 17. He led the charge of the 1st Wisconsin up the ridge. So to me, it was quite real. The other was my grandfather was a judge in Chattanooga, unindicted. It was close on occasion. But he had a group that had coffee every month. I don't know how these people governed a city, because they would, the DA would be there, and the mayor would be there, and the police commissioner, and they would have coffee every morning. And I would be taken down to listen. And this is very much remember the days of old, remember the years of many generations, right? This is pure Song of Moses stuff. And so it was fascinating. So I would see these men in the paper or on the news, but to me they were real. They were these guys drinking coffee. And my first journalistic inquiry was when I was 7 years old. We had a police commissioner named Bookie Turner. The grand jury found that it was an occupational descriptor. But I asked my grandfather, why do they call him Bookie? And he said, well, why don't you go ask him? And so I trundled over, and I said, Commissioner Turner, why do they call you Bookie? And he leaned over and he said, son, it's because I love to read. Now, again, the grand jury had a different view of that. So to me, it was just this web of human beings who happened to be in power. And so I think that was it. The other person, as a writer, who was hugely important to me, and I want to continue to preach this message so he keeps being read, is Herman Wouk. Vital, right? The Winds of War, War and Remembrance, Caine Mutiny, Inside Out, Marjorie Morningstar, Youngblood Hawk, those are incredibly important books. If you don't read anything else about World War II, you could read those two novels and be incredibly well educated about it.
Thank you. So let's get into it. Reading the news, many people reflect that things have never been this bad, or at least we're not living through normal times.
Right.
And your book, The Soul of America, tracks a variety of fault lines through our nation's history. So are there precedents to our moment, or are we on completely new territory? How is our moment the same? How might it be unprecedented?
So for 10 years, and I should say I'm not a partisan, I'm not a Democrat, I'm not a Republican. When I live in Tennessee, so when I say I have conservative friends, that's redundant. I have voted for candidates of both parties. I've only voted in one or two primaries, and that was because I knew the person. So I do try to call them as I see them. I don't believe, by the way, the truth is always in the middle. I don't mean that, but I do. I don't believe either party. For a long time, I did not believe that either party had a monopoly on virtue. And so for 5 years, I believed, and some of Richard and I have colleagues in the media world who disagreed with this, that President Trump was a difference of degree but not of kind, that he represented certain forces that had ebbed and flowed through American life, and that this was the first occasion where they had all coalesced in a certain way to bring someone of that disposition to the pinnacle of power. There had been figures like this in American history, but no one had risen that far. So I was a degree not kind. And then came the 2020 election and the false allegations of fraud, the sowing of doubt and conspiracy to undermine the result of a full and free, fair election was, to my mind, a difference of kind. We had moved into a place where someone was attempting to take autocratic steps in a democratic context. And I think we'll be living with this doubt about elections for a long time. I think it's one of the worst things that we're dealing with. It is the thing that is unprecedented, because much closer elections in sulfurous times, no one thought to say just because they didn't like the result, it was false. Adams and Jefferson didn't do it. Burr didn't do it. Stephen Douglas didn't do it. Hubert Humphrey, Richard Nixon in 1960, Hillary Clinton, Al Gore. Nobody did it. And so I think that's a distinction that illuminates a lot of things. It illuminates a pervasive distrust of institutions. And institutions should not be implicitly trusted. They should be monitored. They should be assessed at all times. But one of the things I think is worth remembering in this moment, when so many people are worried about whether institutions will survive or not, or will hold the line, is that it's not institutions, it's the people in them. It's not courts, it's judges. It's not Congress, it's particular lawmakers. And it brings us back to what I insist, in my view, the central question of the time is, will we have the moral character to live into the implications of the Declaration of Independence, a document that we have rediscovered in other moments like this? At Gettysburg, Lincoln goes to Lincoln goes to Jefferson to define the Civil War. FDR did it in World War II. Dr. King and LBJ did it in the Civil Rights Movement. How does Dr. King end the March on Washington, the sermon? It's that he's not asking for something special. He's asking for us to live up to the statement that people who looked like me, sort of boring Protestants from the South, what we decided to say was going to be the mission statement. So the test of every era is to what degree to which do we live into that sentence, and to what degree do we fall away from it. And what I think the past tells us is that just enough of us at critical moments have gotten it right. And what I find inspiring about that is that there aren't that many examples of it, right? American history is not a fairy tale. There's not a once upon a time. There's not going to be a happily ever after, because this is about us. And I'm sure y'all are better people than I am, but that's not hard, so don't get cocky. But the soul, right, to wander into your lane again, right? In Hebrew and in Greek, it means breath or life, right? When God, this is a test. Let's see if I get this right. All right, when God breathes life into man, that can be translated the same way, right?
Yes.
Score. When Jesus said, that's in the sequel, that greater love hath no man than this, than to lay down his life for his friends, that could be the same word. Aha, see? Yeah, it takes a village. So to me, the soul is not all good or all bad. It's an arena of contention. And I know that if I do the right thing 51% of the time, that's a hell of a good day, and I don't have that many of them. So why would the country be any different? Because a democracy is the full expression of all of us. So we have the capacity to decide that we would like the rule of law to prevail.
Can I pick up on that?
Please.
Because we get the leaders we deserve. We certainly get the leaders we vote for.
Yeah.
And so to the degree that the democracy has been backsliding, a loss in institutions,
Yeah.
trust, what do you attribute that to? Is it technology? Is it some other cultural force?
I think there are two numbers that I think help explain this. Technology, yes. I used to think technology was an accelerant as opposed to a cause, and now I'm not so sure, particularly as technology becomes its own entity, right? And I don't even pretend to understand AI. But $120,000 was the number that the Commerce Department found was the annual household income that a family of four would need to lead what we would think of as a classic post-World War II middle-class life. Household income for family of four is about $72,000. All right, so you have a gap right there. In 1965, the Gallup found that 74% of Americans trusted the federal government to do the right thing some or most of the time. That number is currently 12. Right? So that was the gasoline on the floor of the garage that the populism represented by President Trump, I think, that helps explain the 2016 election. The other thing that we have to be honest about, and I believe very much in, if you mentioned that in your introductory remarks, being civil does not mean being obtuse or avoiding the truth. In fact, being civil requires honesty because civility is based not on being polite, but on taking you seriously. And you're taking me seriously because we're all children of God, right? So to be quite honest, if we think about moments of cohesive American culture, if I ask you all, what's a cohesive moment in American culture, you'd probably say 1955, right? You know, network news is coming along. It's a period, interstate highways are going, you know, the civil rights movement's beginning to move along. The country was 82% white in 1955, right? And now it's roughly 49%. And that matters here. People who look like me have been in charge for a very long time. And we're not going to reflexively be in charge going forward. And so a lot of folks who look like me aren't very happy about that. And I think that's, if somehow or another we ignore that, tiptoe around it, I don't think we're doing right by the people who sacrificed so much to get us this far in the constitutional experiment. And so I think that's it. The other, you mentioned technology. The tyranny of the algorithm is a real thing. The media world now, I mean, this is like describing how I got on the ark, but my first job was for Ruth Sulzberger Hamburg, the publisher of the Chattanooga Times, Adolph Ox's first newspaper. The second investment worked out a little bit better when he bought the New York Times. But I joined, I mean, so this, if you ever want to get economic and business advice, don't ask me. I went into print journalism in 1991. So it's like, hey, wait, Titanic, let me jump on board, you know, pulling them back into the Southampton harbor. But it is different in that instead of having a couple of times a day, there are enough people here who remember this, you know, morning paper, afternoon paper, listen to the radio, get some bulletins. Even if you were a news junkie, that was your diet because there wasn't anything else. And so it wasn't as central It didn't feel as central. It could be your organizing principle, but it wasn't ambient, right? And that's what the phone in particular has changed. And we live in a media culture that prizes, privileges, rewards speed, hyperbole, and ideological predictability, right? Nobody wants to tune in to say, well, on the one hand, on the other hand. I'm of two minds about that. I don't know. That's not clickbait. The clickbait is the socialists are coming. And so I think that does matter. And I think fundamentally, if we don't make it, if the Republic were not, as we understand it, were to fundamentally change into a more illiberal and autocratic way, it will be not least because our political culture shifted, and it's not new in human experience, but it's new in the American experience, shifted from seeing politics as the mediation of differences and instead seeing it as total war, where you are not my opponent, you are my enemy. And yes, I'm told to love my enemy, but I'd really rather not. And I think that's the moral question here. And precedents are good, though. I mean, look, this is a country that, until 1965, we had functional apartheid in my native region. You mentioned 1619 versus 1776. There's a very good case to be made that the United States of America is about 60 years old. Think about it. 1965 was the first time we had a genuine multiracial, multi-ethnic democracy. And so we're very young.
So how do we do that? Meaning, I think of Lincoln's second inaugural, that he both had to state and stand firm in his conviction, but he also needed to find and present a path, a language by which the South, that the Union could endure. So if there was hypothetically, I think about it today with the divides. If 70% of the people feel one way and 30% feel another way, that you can stand firm in your conviction, but you can also keep the community together.
Well, that's what a republic is supposed to be. I mean, so Lincoln's issue was, Everett Dirksen once said, every American has to get right with Lincoln. You sort of have to deal with him because he represents in many ways the best of us and also some of our darker impulses, right? He was not a racial egalitarian. He was anti-slavery, but that was different. Until 1864, he was for removing Black Americans from the country. Until 64, right? You don't read that at the monument. It's not on the coffee mug. But this goes back to what we were talking about history. I can be glib about that, but that was to understand what the actual debates were about slavery and egalitarianism and race and power and identity and citizenship, to understand that it was not a cartoon. This was not some sort of Hollywood version. There were people with complicated, deeply held views, and you cannot just tell people they're wrong. It doesn't work. I refer you to our former president. You can't just say, you've got that wrong. Lyndon Johnson, in his last speech, the last public speech, it was at his library in Austin. It was a conference on civil rights. He was so sick, he was taking nitroglycerin pills there are pictures of him taking it. I'm not sure they worked as well with the Cuddy Sark, but that was That was Texas medicine. He said, if you want to convince someone, don't just tell them they're wrong. Because you know what? They don't think they're wrong. They think they're right. And what I just said is about as countercultural to where we are today as you can imagine, right? There are whole networks whose business model is to tell half the country they're wrong. It's literally their business model. So how do you move the incentive structure? And to me, the empowering thing, which is at once thrilling and terrifying, is what's thrilling is that it's up to us. And what's terrifying is that it's, oh God, it's up to us. Right? We can, if you change the incentives, let me promise you something. The people in power will do something different. I have friends, you have friends who, if Mitt Romney were president, they would be Romney Republicans, right? They would make Nelson Rockefeller look like a right-winger, if that's what enough people wanted. And I'm not being snarky about it. That's the job they've chosen. I once, Alan Greenspan, when I was doing the Jackson book years ago now, I was trying to understand the Bank of the United States. I never successfully did it, but I was trying. And I went to see Chairman Greenspan, who had kindly said he would, because I was trying to understand, was it a central bank? You know, how did this work? You know, and Jackson vetoed the bank, which was this great populist moment. And I said, you know, what I just don't understand, Mr. Chairman, is we were sitting at lunch. What I don't understand is that, you know, Andrew Jackson, when he was facing down South Carolina and these nullifiers, these sort of early secessionists, he was all for federal power. He was devoted to federal power, and he was not going to budge. But then on the bank issue, he wanted to destroy the central engine of economic authority. And it's just contradictory. I don't understand. And Greenspan, as ever, took a while to answer. And he just looked at me and he said, he was a politician. A politician's unit of commerce is power. It's a great phrase. The unit of commerce is power. It wasn't about philosophy. It wasn't about, and there was some principle there and all that, but it was a very sobering moment. I was probably in my 30s, I guess. And I was like, well, that's it's so important to understand. You show me the incentives, and I'll show you what the result's going to be. So change the incentives, you change the result.
Got it. It doesn't work with my kids either to tell them they're wrong.
Yeah. And how's the NyQuil? Because we're going to work on that.
So
I should volunteer to come preach. This will be my big chance to get to y'all.
So it is fun to have an Episcopal on this bema. So put me in therapy or the Jewish community for a moment. We're constantly balancing, as American Jews, our minority status.
Wait, you want the Episcopalian to be the therapist and not the Jew? Have you been outside much? Sorry.
Like, I have like one arm tied behind my back here.
This is unfair. The poor man can't speak, and I'm throwing like Anglican jokes at him.
I promise you, Richard Haas doesn't get off this easy. So we're living with real fears for our safety.
Yes.
And yet, on the other hand, we're empowered in ways our predecessors could have never imagined. So as a historian of the United States, how do you make sense of this moment for American Jewry with real fears from the left and from the right?
I absolutely understand. I mean, I see the tensions, the reality of the anxieties, the fear. I will say this, the first liberty in the United States before the Declaration was religious liberty. James Madison, at the age of 25 in 1775, in the Virginia legislature, changed the word religious tolerance to religious liberty, because he said if tolerance presupposes that someone has the capacity to take it away, but a liberty is inviolate, it's sacred. If it comes from above, if it's vertical and not horizontal, then it's more secure. The letter that George Washington borrowed the language from the Newport synagogue using Micah, that the point of the United States was that it would be an asylum for the oppressed, and everyone would sit under their own vine and fig tree, and none should make them afraid. I am a enormous believer that religious liberty and a mutual respect is as vital as any other particular political insight the American world has ever created. So, what I don't know is whether anti-Semitism can be answered by means other than the kind of moral education and moral disposition we're talking about. It's people denouncing and standing against it at every point, because it is a slippery slope. The cataclysms of the 20th century stand as the most horrific and essential memorial to the worst that we can be. And anything that begins to demonize, set apart, attack, conflate political debates with identity, questions of identity, must be stopped and stood against at every point. That said, what I don't know is, is it possible that the political culture just isn't serious enough to make the distinction between criticizing the actions of a particular government and having any criticism of that government be seen as an attack on the identity and the sanctity of a whole people? And I struggle with that all the time.
I mean, I have to say, when I read your treatment of Lindbergh framing the war effort as an effort on behalf of the Jews, or Father Coughlin spewing his hatred, right? I can't help but think that the anti-Semitisms are just a mutation of anti-Semitism's past repackaged into this moment of time.
Oh, absolutely. It's a yes. So one thing to think about is, I think the most analogous period to where we are today is 100 years ago. So if we'd all been here in 1925, we would have just come through the First World War, the Bolshevik Revolution, immense anti-Semitic and anti-Catholic sentiment, anti-immigrant sentiment in the country. The Ku Klux Klan is refounded. 2 to 6 million Americans joined it. 5 governors were members of the Klan, probably 10 senators, maybe 30 members of the House. And it was a middle-class movement. This wasn't truck stop terrorists, right? This was the only reason Harry Truman didn't join the Klan is because he had some Catholics he liked to play poker with. That's literally true. or he would have been a member of the Klan and then couldn't have been president. So when you look at the Klan of the 1920s, it is as virulently anti-Semitic and anti-Catholic as it was anti-Black. And yes, it is a persistent, reprehensible virus that recurs. And I think at our best, it has been put in abeyance, never fully, obviously, but at our best, it's been put in abeyance by people, I think, recognizing that our civil liberties are only as strong as the protections that the most vulnerable among us feel. And if you feel, let me put it this way, if you feel endangered by anti-Semitic feeling, then that is a threat to me. Because it might be you today, but it could be me tomorrow. And that is the covenant. This is what drives me crazy when people treat politics as day trading. It's not about winning the afternoon. It's not. Human history is utterly defined by the strong becoming the weak and the weak becoming the strong. The point of the United States of America was that the rule of law and a recognition of common decency and dignity would remove us from the state of nature, what Hobbes called the war of all against all. But now we live in that. We're in the forest, and we're all either at each other's throats or worried someone's going to get to our throat. And is this new? No. This is the oldest story. It's biblical.
All right.
So what do we do? Well, what we do is we try to decide, seems to me, what do we want the world to say of us? What do we want the answer to be when we just remember the days of old, remember the years of many generations? Ask thy fathers, and they will tell thee, their elders, and they will show thee. What do you want to be told or shown from what we did? And what I want it to be is that we strengthened a covenant that has a secular scriptural basis with roots in sacred scripture, which is the Declaration of Independence, which is fundamentally a Jewish, Christian, monotheistic document based on human equality, and that we push that forward. Not that we decided that, a tax rate or who went into a bathroom was somehow worth blowing up a country that managed to project just enough power to go across the English Channel in 1944, or to stand until 1989, 1991, against Soviet totalitarianism. These are big things.
Is belief in American exceptionalism a virtue or a vice? I mean, how do we square the circle of this belief with how very ordinary and sometimes underperforming we are as a country?
Is it a virtue or a vice? I think if it's aspirational, it's great. I think if it's a get out of jail free card, it's bad. Right? I think, are we a chosen people? I think what Lincoln said is right. We're an almost chosen people. Right? When I'm in a church, or I'm in an ecclesiastical setting, I'm reminded, when Lincoln ran for Congress the first time, he was running against a Methodist circuit rider. And the Methodist was having a revival meeting during the campaign. So Lincoln came, and he was sitting right down front. And he got to the altar call part, and Cartwright's name was Peter Cartwright. Cartwright said, "Everybody who wants to go to heaven, stand up." And everybody stood up except Lincoln. And Cartwright looked at him and said, "Well, Mr. Lincoln, where do you want to go?" And he said, "Well, I want to go to Congress."
All right. We talked about minorities, Jews and otherwise. I want to talk about those at our borders. As a Jewish community, we're particularly sensitive and self-aware of our arrival on U.S. shores and of others, those who see the United States as a sanctuary and those adopting exclusionist approaches. So what does the past tell us about our present and the direction this current moment will take?
We've always grown stronger the more widely we've opened our arms, right? We're the most powerful nation by almost any measure, ever. And should it be indiscriminate? No. Should people obey the law? Yes. But I'm with that crazy, really just left-wing radical Ronald Reagan, who said in his farewell address on January 12th, 1989, "I've always been asked about the shining city on a hill, and I've never quite said what I meant by it. Well, what I meant by it was it's a city with strong walls, but it's strong and hums with commerce and is a light for those lost pilgrims hurtling through the darkness toward home." Right? And so we're in a place where, and this is a historical point, not a partisan one, the Republican nominees for president in 1968, 1972, 1976, 1980, 1984, 1992, 1996, 2000, 2004, 2008, and 2012 could not be nominated by that party. That's just an amazing thing. And so there's a wonderful debate. It floats around online in 1980, late, when George H.W. Bush was refusing to get out of the race against Reagan. President Bush Sr., as Richard knows, was a very ferocious politician. He came across as, Mr. Nice Guy. He would cut your throat for a vote. He would be the first person to call 911 after he cut your throat for the vote, but he would do it. He once, the old man once shook the hand of a department store mannequin in New Hampshire and asked him for a vote. Said, eh? And Mrs. Bush said, "George, you just shook the hand of a mannequin." He said, "Never know, gotta ask." But in 1980, he wasn't getting out of the race against Reagan. And they have a debate in Houston, Bush's old congressional district, which is, it's like if we had a debate from the Peloponnesian War. I mean, this is how long ago this was. They're talking about asylum. They're talking about how to deal with this in a rational, not unemotional way. When issues become existential and emotional, reason takes flight. And I think that's where we are in immigration. George W. Bush tried. Go back and look what he proposed in 2006. It would have no chance today. And I don't think it's who we want to be, but it's who we've been. I mean, let's be very clear. The 1924 Immigration Act had far-reaching and tragic effects. It's another reason 1965 is so important. It wasn't just the Voting Rights Act. It was the Immigration and Nationality Act, which took the national quotas and opened it up. So look, we're in this moment. It's enormous demographic change. It's enormous economic change, enormous communications, how we figure things out, how we think about things. And there's a reason kingships and autocracies have defined the history of the millennia, because it's kind of comfortable. history tells us it's a little easier to decide what you're going to think by the team you pick or the clan with a C you join than to work it out. And what is exceptional about the country is that we have created, at our best, a deliberative arena where it's not just about where you were born or what you believe or what you look like. It's about what you think. It's about what reason tells you, informed by faith.
So I'm going to ask you two more, then I'm going to open it up for a couple questions. To build on your last, is there any chance of the Republican Party ever returning to an Eisenhower, Nixon, Reagan, Bush tradition? And is there a possibility, a place for a third centrist party to emerge? So
no and maybe. I could go on, but I don't think so. I think, parties change usually every 60, 70 years. You're going to regret asking this, so I apologize now, but to some extent, this is interesting. To some extent, one way to understand where we are on the Republican side is that it's a reaction to the way the party actually governed from 1952 through the end of President George W. Bush's term, right? So one way to think about American politics in the from 1933 to about 2017 is that it was a figurative debate, if you think about it, between Ronald Reagan and Franklin Roosevelt, right? They were the 20-yard lines. And that sort of told you where the end points were. Every American president basically governed on that spectrum. And there were two central questions, right? What was the relative role of the state in the marketplace? And what was the relative projection of force against commonly agreed upon foes and rivals? Right? That was the coherence. And what 2017 did, for better or for worse, was it ended that conversation. Right? It was like the grown-ups in the Charlie Brown special, womp, 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 just changed that. So what happened to some of you asked about what happened in 16 and 24 is the Republican presidents played a pretty dangerous game. And it ended up not working in the long run, which was you run to the right and you govern from the center. That's what Eisenhower did. President Eisenhower comes back from Paris, where he's founded NATO in 1952, and he gives he's the great general, the conquering hero. He goes to Abilene to announce his presidential candidacy and gives a pretty tough partisan speech, accuses Truman of losing China. Right, his commander-in-chief until 20 minutes before. He's a competitive guy. He wanted to win. This is what Herbert Brownell and others told him to do. That's what he did. What is the central, if you think about it, one of the central articles of faith on the American right is that the Warren Court was out of control, right? Who appointed Earl Warren? Dwight David Eisenhower, who also appointed in 1956, this is how long ago this was, in 1956, Ike had two appointments. He was worried that was looking too partisan, so he appointed William Brennan from New Jersey because he was a Democrat, because he thought it'd be balanced. It's like we're talking about, Leviticus. It's so long ago. William Brennan, Potter Stewart, Earl Warren were Eisenhower appointees. Harry Blackmun wrote the Roe decision appointed by Richard Nixon, right? So you look at, if you're a conservative, not necessarily a Republican, but if you're a conservative and you thought Joe McCarthy probably had a point and got railroaded a little bit, I'm not making fun of this, there are a lot of people like this, you suddenly think, you know what, I'm paying more in taxes, and there are people who don't work as hard, and they're doing all right. They're getting money from the government. I'm paying that money. And by the way, the court just said my kid can't pray in school because of the 1962 Engel decision, written by William J. Brennan, William O. Douglas. Suddenly, you know what, these Republicans, you know, Reagan, he came along, he knew what to do, but you know what, government didn't get much smaller, did it? Somebody comes along and says the whole thing's corrupt. It resonates. It resonated. And so, can the Republican Party of Eisenhower be reconstituted? No. He barely got it together for his own era. That doesn't mean, I don't want to pundit you too much here, but what the Democratic Party does is a whole different question. You know, you talked about narratives earlier. You win in American politics. You win, I would argue, you win whole generations by the stories you tell. For better or for worse, President Trump tells a very compelling story. And it has not yet been answered by a story that moves a dispositive number of folks.
Thank you. Let's take one or two questions from the community. Jimmy, a short statement with a question mark.
Thank you for coming tonight.
Thank you.
You mentioned a very powerful statement that we were all children of God. So why doesn't our leadership, and that resonates very strongly with me, and I'm sure everybody in the room, why doesn't our leadership use words like that? And I'm not talking about Trump, I'm talking about all of our leadership. Why don't they use words like that? What does it matter? I'm a graduate of the Episcopal Academy, by the way.
Oh, good. Oh, good. Excellent. So I will say this. I think that there is a lack of comfort on the American political left with theocentric language. I think it's ahistorical because the greatest, when the center left has told successful stories in America, it has been infused with religious language. You know, President Kennedy being the great example. On earth, God's work must truly be our own, right? I mean, his Ted Sorensen used to tell the story about President Kennedy's inaugural address, which is such a Cold War document and really kind of Manichaean, and it's about America's role in bringing light to the darkness. As he liked to say, it was written by a Unitarian for a Roman Catholic to convince a Protestant nation to kill atheists. So there we are. That covers it. And there's one rabbi and a parachute. I think, you know, George W. Bush does. He does talk that way. But I think I'm with Thomas Jefferson on this. Jefferson did not believe in a Trinitarian God, right? He didn't believe the Red Sea was parted. You know, he took the Gospels and he cut out all the miracles, and but he always used religious language in state papers. And he was asked why. He said that America was like Israel when you have to have exceptionalism. In Jefferson's first inaugural, he describes America as Israel of old, right? So it goes there. So this is the crazy atheist, Thomas Jefferson. He did it because he said that the leader of a republic must speak the vernacular of those within the republic. And I think it's actually an abdication of leadership for people not to speak in the language we're talking about.
If you could assign one piece of American rhetoric to every high school student across the nation, mandatory reading, what would it be?
Well, after your sermons,
Yeah.
we do that first, right? Wow. You know what? This might surprise you. And I suspect many of you probably haven't encountered it, but I really do recommend it. Go to what George W. Bush used to call the Google machine. It's on the internet. I'm very big. I do impersonations at assisted living facilities with my... They slot me in between Murder, She Wrote and Jeopardy. I'm very excited. This is the youngest crowd I've seen in years. Thank y'all. What would you ask me? Oh, Frederick Douglass. Frederick Douglass. Frederick Douglass's eulogy for Abraham Lincoln delivered at the unveiling of the Freedmen's Monument on Capitol Hill, the first monument in public art entirely funded by Black Americans. The president was there, President Grant. It was the first time really a Black man had spoken to the power structure. It is a profound statement about the perils and possibilities of history and biography. It's deeply biblical. He says Lincoln was fundamentally the white man's president. He was cold, tardy, and indifferent. But when the hour came, our redemption and the fate of my people met in this man. And how can you expect him to have done everything? Isn't it enough that he did this thing? And I signed it to students, my own students, about, this is the best we can do. If the best we can do are people who got stuff wrong, I don't find that depressing. I find that inspiring. Because that means we might just be able to get it done.
All right, just for fun, and then we'll...
This has been very serious little time.
If you could ask Richard Haas one question, what would you ask Richard to put him on the spot?
What has he got on Susan that keeps her there? Year after year after year.
And Richard, if there was one question that you wanted to ask your pal here, what would it be?
Easy. Don't make me call Joe.
Yeah, you get one line for help here, John. So let's go to the basic question. We're about to hit our 250th. And in some ways it circles back to Rabbi Cosgrove's opening thing, which is, if Churchill were here tonight, he would say, Americans could always be counted on to do the right thing, but only after they've tried everything else. There's a sanguine quality about American history. We've made it 249 and a half years. How worried are you that we're overly sanguine?
I am worried. It's a great question. And I was sanguine until 2020. And I thought it was sort of the, God loves drunks, little children in the United States of America, sometimes in that order. But no, I think that there's nothing guaranteed about an experiment that requires us to defer gratification. And that's what this is, right? It's that, I'm going to pay taxes so you all can fix JFK, which, by the way, you should do. but I may never fly to JFK. And you're going to do something because I'm going to do whatever. And the notion that Richard did a marvelous book about citizenship. And you talked about covenant, right? And it's what we owe each other. It's not just your bill of obligations, right? That it's not just rights, it's obligations. I'm stealing all this from Haas. And that's, I hate to say it, that's counterintuitive. Democracy is counterintuitive. Now, you may disagree. I mean, there are, John Locke would say, oh, the natural disposition of humankind is to be in community with each other. I don't think so. I don't. Maybe I'm being a cynical historian, but I think mostly the story of the world is really more about conflict and rivalry than it is about community. And what liberal democracy has given us for 2.5 centuries is the means, the vernacular to satisfy just enough of our personal appetites to get us to stay in the covenant. The thing that most worries me, and this is a point from Danielle Allen at Harvard, it was the first person I heard say this, is there's a very good case to be made that what James Madison in Federalist 10 writes that there are two kinds of republics in history. Very, very small, where everybody knows each other, so therefore you can resolve differences. And the other is a republic has to be huge. It has to be the size of a continent like this. Why? Because that means the crazies can't find each other. Well, Danielle, we had a meeting in Tennessee and in Knoxville, and she starts talking about this, and I'm like, oh my God. So is it possible that technology, by enabling extremes to come together and possibly form dispositive majorities, has undercut the central insight of Madisonian democracy? That's the thing that worries me the most. Can we ask something about nice? So the Haas, of course, has taken us way down.
We're going to...
What?
Be prescriptive. If that's your analysis, if you could then describe a way to see that history turns out well, what would you want to see more?
For those who can't hear, you can't hear my voice either, but a prescriptive step towards ameliorating this concern. And then we're going to ask you something pleasant.
So Robert Penn Warren has a great poem about telling a story. So, tell me a story, tell me a story. In this century and moment of madness, tell me a story. Make it a story of great distances and starlight. Make it a story of deep delight. The story I would tell is of a country that has liberated more than it's imprisoned, and that it wasn't easy. I would do it by case study. I would tell the story of accepting immigrants. I would tell the story of civil rights. I would tell the story of how we became the place that our immigration problem is that people want to come here. And I think that's the story. That's the prescription I would do, is how have we done this before, and how do you want to be remembered? Because that appeals to the ego, right? No politician, I sometimes say this to politicians, is what do you want us to think about when we look at your portrait? And they love that because they can't imagine a world where we're not looking at their portrait.
We're going to conclude with the national anthem. One of the sweetest books you wrote was a book about the American songbook.
Right.
So can you teach us something about the anthem or anthems.
Sure. Well, the rabbi is very kind to mention this book. I did it with my friend and neighbor, Tim McGraw. I was misinformed. I thought it was a project with Faith Hill. And then he showed up. I wanted to quote Henry David Thoreau, and Tim said, why do we have that running back from LSU in the book? But what I was so pleased by, what the rabbi said earlier about Woody Guthrie versus Irving Berlin, is I do think music as well does this, is you can tell the story of the last 40 years or so in American politics by contrasting and comparing Lee Greenwood and Bruce Springsteen, right? Brother, Can You Spare a Dime, and Happy Days Are Here Again. God Bless America, This Land Is Your Land, right? There is this perpetual tension. And I think what Francis Scott Key did was, like several other hugely important pieces of music, Mississippi Goddam by Nina Simone, the Battle Hymn of the Republic by Julia Ward Howe, they were written in about 20 minutes. Julia Ward Howe wrote the Battle Hymn of the Republic in one night. Francis Scott Key wrote this in one night. There's something about genuine inspiration that can produce canonical music.
Thank you. Thank you so much to Jon Meacham. Please rise. Face it.
Oh, there we are.
Oh, say, can you see by the dawn's early light what so proudly we hailed at twilight's last gleaming, whose broad stripes and bright stars through the perilous fight o'er the ramparts we watched were so gallantly streaming, and the rockets ringing, the bombs bursting in air, gave proof through the night that our flag was still there. Oh, say does that star-spangled banner yet wave o'er the land of the free and the home of the brave.
Have a good evening, everyone.